Okay, before that, I had talked about opportunity costs at the bottom of our homework 4. And opportunity costs are kind of a funky thing in that you can find almost as many different descriptions of what they are as what they are. But in general, there's 2 primary approaches to opportunity costs or describing them. There's a supply side approach. And so this presents opportunity costs as basically the marginal cost of your decision or the money that you gave up to make that decision. So it's just the cost of the next best option. So marginal cost approach, I've got an example here. You can go from the slide and click and watch a YouTube video of someone really smart telling you that this is the way you do opportunity costs, or you can click on economicshelp.org, which is a neat little web page. I don't want to belittle it, but a neat web page that has economic concepts, but they go this supply side route, which you'll see that I don't like as much. There's also a demand side way, and that's this opportunity cost is the foregone benefit associated with the consumption or investment decision. And so that decision is fundamental here. There's a neat little animated video. It's 1 Minute Economics, I think, on YouTube you can watch. I think they get it right. Or you can go to Investopia and their opportunity cost page and look there if you'd like and see what other people, but it's this 2 opposing views of what opportunity cost means. All right, so what if you say, hey, what does Wikipedia think? Because that's how I do all my stuff. Well, they have it confusing as well. They've gotten better on their main opportunity cost page of giving this actual equational definition at the top, but they present it both ways because it is presented both ways. And you have people that do it in 2 different ways. So when in doubt, you go back to who came up with the concept, and that's our Friedrich von Wieser. You can go to his Wikipedia page, and you can see what he thinks about it. But in general, these 2 approaches, supply side and demand side, are the Brits. That's Alfred Marshall, our Marshallian cross that we use in our economics model, and the Austrian approach. And we're going Austrian here. So we're using the market model from the Brits, but we're going to go Austrian here. And what it is the opportunity cost is the return of the most lucrative option you could have had against the return of the chosen option. So if I did something where I could have made $10, but instead I only made $5, the best option is 10 minus the option I chose, 5. The opportunity cost is $5. So it's basically the costs that the purchasers would willingly forgo to agree to pay the cost of the chosen option. So that's it, right? Best option minus the option you chose. If you chose the best option, opportunity cost is 0, right? You made the best thing. There's no cost in that decision. That's how we're going to do it. This little equation down here is what we'll use, and they've moved that up to the top of Wikipedia. I didn't have any say in that, but anyways, that makes it much more clear in what I'm expecting from Homework 4. Okay, onward and upward. When we get into these definitional parts, the multiple choice true false for the quiz, it's going to be a lot of the stuff that we had in slides in the 2nd week and a little bit in the 3rd week there. So 3 major concepts in this class and in economics, I believe, in general. Economics, if you're thinking of the definition there, it is the study of the allocation of scarce resources under competing uses. But in general, when we're talking economics, we're talking efficiency, equity, and temporal dynamics. And so efficiency, right, it involves allocating those scarce resources, and that because they're scarce, we should be using them in the most efficient manner possible. Equity, how the resources are distributed matters. If only one person has all of the resources, even if it's efficient, that's not a great economic solution, right? And temporal dynamics is you can't think about economics and efficiency and equity without looking at multiple time periods. This is really important in natural resources. That's what makes natural resources a little different than regular economics or forest economics, of course, different from agricultural economics. Right? Time matters. Think of wildlife populations, think of forests. supply in future periods or population in future time periods is dependent on the decisions you make in the present time periods. There's a linkage between those, and we need to be considering it. Okay, efficiency. I had multiple different ways that I looked at that. So static efficiency here is, are we doing the best that we can with our scarce resources in this time period? So it's looking at just one of those crosses that we looked at in class. And then dynamic efficiency. Are we doing the best when we consider how all those things play out over time? There's other ways that you can think about it too. Productive efficiency. Are you doing things in the best way possible? Allocative efficiency. Are you allocating those resources in the best way possible? And then social efficiency. We're going to get to that when we get to environmental economics. We start looking outside of the two people or parties that are part of making the decision of a transaction within a market, and we bring in non-market factors and environmental factors into it. So 3 different types there. If you're looking at that: static efficiency, dynamic efficiency, one time period versus many time periods. Productive efficiency, are you producing things in the best way possible? Allocated, are the inputs being used there in the best way possible? And then social efficiency, I guess productive efficiency, inputs being used in the best way possible. Allocative, think of outputs coming in the best way possible. And then social efficiency, a little later, you won't hear much about that. Okay, so back to these 3 basic things again. And when we're looking at equity, there were 2 ways I said we might look at equity. One is that, is it fair? So equity is everyone in the same situation treated the same way. That would be, say, horizontal equity in a market. And then this vertical one is the wealth and income distributed equally or fairly across the entire population. So both those things are important. It's important that we treat people fairly, and it's important that things get distributed in a way that makes sense. Okay, some other concepts that we talked about: marginal versus total value. So marginal value, those are those price points, right? That's one point on a curve. Total values, that's those areas that we got to integrating under a curve. And we'll get to that later in this as well. Opportunity cost, we just went over again up above. It's a difference between the value of one activity and another. It's in what I defined it above, the difference of the best option versus the option you chose. Okay, public goods, I have it in italics here because we're going to slide on that until a couple of weeks from now. And then time preference, we spent lots of time on time preference. So we looked at discounting, discounted cash flow, net present value. We looked at nominal versus real in terms of interest rates and prices. And we'll get to a social discount rate here shortly, but not necessarily on this quiz. Benefit cost analysis. So, right, that's looking at all these future costs and benefits and the discounting that we're doing. Okay, so some basic definitions here: goods versus services. So goods tend to relate to things that are items. So wood, gas, fish, they tend to be extractive and things that are consumed when you use them. Services tend to relate to activities, things like flood control, habitat, clean air here. They tend to be non-extractive, or they're consumed in place. They are out there in place. So goods we tend to use, services are things that are typically used in place. If you think about it further, goods tend to be quantitative. They have numerical characteristics, so they work well in markets that way. They tend to have values, and development is often thought of with respect to goods, but it can relate to services as well. Some key concepts down here in services: they tend to be qualitative. They're consumed in place. They usually have non-use values, and conservation is typically what you think when you're looking at expanding on those services. So development of goods, conservation of services, basic definitional stuff here. We touched on models before we got to our basic market model there. These are not reality. These are just constructs. They're built from frameworks, theoretical, conceptual frameworks that are designed to explain systems or how we make decisions or allocate resources. Economic models describe human decision-making. So here I had 2 types of models here: Macroeconomic models looking broadly at the economy. This could be a general equilibrium model. It's got the entire economy in there, all the energy, labor, capital markets, everything that's going on. And then there's microeconomics. They tend to look at individual choices or individual industries. And these tend to be partial equilibrium models. They look at part of the economy. So partial equilibrium tends to go more with microeconomic models, and general equilibrium tends to go with macroeconomic models. Often in natural resources, we are using biological models that have biological processes, and we're integrating them with economic models to get these bioeconomic models that have a biological component and an economic component into them. And that's how we can allocate, or that's how we can look at these human interactions with these biological systems or natural systems. And we can get an idea of how policies or stimulus to that market may affect both the use of the policy and the equity and the efficiency to the people that are using it. We watched a video here where we looked at this Kuznets curve, where we looked at environmental degradation out here as a function of per capita income. So as you're moving to the right on this graph, you're getting richer and richer and richer. When you're poor, right, you eating food, heat, cooking, that sort of thing is all going to be very important, and your degradation goes down as you get more wealthy. You may reach a point where all of a sudden you're rich enough to where those basic human needs aren't as important, and as your income goes up, you want to improve those environmental things. This is the Kuznets curve, but we also saw that, right, that's not always held true. Think about CO2. We're the richest, or one of the richer countries in the world, and yet we'd be way up here in the red. We produce a lot of CO2 to have that lifestyle, and we've been producing more and more of it, and as an environmental degradant as we go. So not always true with this Kuznets curve, but something to think about. We also met Kuznets here for his GDP contribution. Anyway, let's look now at real and nominal prices. So real prices are constant. They're adjusted for inflation. A real dollar in 2012 is going to be the same as that real dollar in 2037. They'll have the same purchasing power. Nominal prices are in the dollar of the day. It's what you had to pull out of your pocketbook at that point to buy it. So we used diesel prices here as an example in our class. And the green line here was diesel prices from 1979 up to present, and then projections of what they'd be going forward. These are nominal, so in the dollar of the day. And you can see those nominal prices are rising over time here out to $6.50 in 2039 per gallon. You know, yikes. But inflation's also going on, and we've seen high inflation just recently. It's been back in the news. And when you adjust these real prices, or sorry, these nominal prices for inflation, you end up with real prices. And those real prices, that $6.50 out in the future, is the same as what would this be, about $4.01 or so, just over $4 a gallon in today's term. So it hasn't got as scary going out in time real, but it is high at these peaks going out. So real and nominal prices, we did a homework adjusting for inflation. So you guys should be up on that as well. When we look at the discount rates that we use, right, when you're going to use real prices, you use a real discount rate. When you're going to use nominal prices in an analysis, you need to use a nominal discount rate. And what we had here is that the real rate, this is from our homework too, is equal to the nominal rate minus inflation. And that gets us to where we're going to be. Neither one's right or wrong. You just have to be consistent. Real with real, nominal with nominal. Consistency is key. So then we spent time on our market model with Alfred Marshall here, the guy who we just poo-pooed on opportunity costs, had a great contribution in kind of theoretical standard economics that we use today. It's considered kind of the father of modern economics. We had two concepts here in terms of the static efficiency, one time period that we're looking at. We had a law of demand in the green line here, which is this diminishing willingness to pay. And we had a law of supply there, the marginal cost. being the blue line, and we had increasing marginal costs. So two other quick concepts that we'll touch on later: ceteris paribus, all else equal, and Pareto efficiency, but we're going to hit those in other slides as we go. In order to be able to use that market model, Alfred Marshall's model, right, we have to assume certain things for efficiency. So from the readings that we had, product homogeneity is important for this, that no difference between the goods. So all these goods are basically the same. And so in class, I pointed out that we just watched people, if you watch a Super Bowl, spend millions of dollars to try to not have this be the case. They want to capture more of the surpluses out there by differentiating their goods and getting you to pay more for their goods than other goods. We also assume, or must assume, no buyer power. So there's no buyer in a market that has enough of the market that they can influence prices, and no supplier power, that no buyer encompasses enough of the market that they can influence prices, or seller, I suppose, maybe that should say. Conditions for efficiency. These are the two big ones: perfect competition, perfect information. So perfect competition is, like we were saying, there's many buyers and sellers, so people aren't setting prices. And then perfect information is that you know what you're doing. We know in reality this isn't the case. People make lots of crazy decisions. But in general, when we're thinking about how these markets work and how our policies are going to play out, we have to assume these things to use this theoretical construct to look at markets and policy. Okay, these other two concepts we were getting back to: ceteris paribus, all else equal. When we use that model, and remember, it's not reality, we look at the effect of one change or shift, we isolate it to that, and Pareto efficiency. When we get to that point where supply equals demand, right, that's the point where no one move is going to make someone better off higher than it makes someone worse off, right? So you're at that optimal point. Okay, so integrating under these things, these areas, we spent time on this just last week. You need to know the area under the demand curve, but over the price line. This is what you'd be willing to pay at some point minus what you did pay at some point. That's your consumer profit, this L. Go back on that. L is your consumer profit, right? That's a benefit. The area under that is the producer's profit. So that's what they got paid minus down here what it costs to produce it. That's producer profit, M. Total cost is the area under that marginal cost curve. So you're integrating under the marginal cost curve, that's total cost. If you want to look at total revenue, that's P times Q, or the area of that rectangle down there. And then net benefits, or net social surplus, is going to be L plus M. Consumer's profit plus producer's profit, or consumer surplus plus producer surplus, right? L plus M. When we're going to look across an economy, everyone has a willingness to pay, or that sort of thing. We sum horizontally to get to market demand. Same thing for supply. I'm not going to go into too much detail. We looked at burritos down here with these people and summing up what they'd be willing to pay. Horizontally, we sum these things across. So horizontally, right, 15, you can follow those lines. That's what we're looking at there. When we're thinking about reaching equilibrium, we had two cases in our readings. We had the first one. In this case, it was hot dogs. And if we're looking at $5 for hot dogs, we have a willingness to pay for hot dogs at $5 of only 100, but willingness to supply them $5 a hot dog. They're great. They want to supply a whole bunch. We have 500. There's a surplus of hot dogs that would be out there. And if you get down to $1 a hot dog, right? There's not many people willing to supply hot dogs at $1 a piece, but there's a lot of people demanding them. There's a shortage. And so you'd have this market that goes back and forth trying to get there till eventually you found that magic number of 300 hot dogs at $3. And so that kind of converges to that. So it's like an auction, if you will, to get to supply and demand. And once you get there, right, that's that optimal one where it's no better off going out. So you're not going to have shortages or surpluses. You're at that point where everything is in balance, and you can't go out of that balance without making people worse off. So getting back here where we're looking at a shift. So now we start over here and we shift. What that means is we're going to have a new equilibrium, whether you think it's an auction or whether we're going to get to what we do on the next slide for how that's met. we move from one equilibrium to when it shifts, a new equilibrium. Prices change and quantities change, and you're going to have to know how that plays out. So when we looked at how that played out in class, this slide summarizes a lot of stuff that we had. So you have a decreasing demand shift in the upper left, that's what it looks like, price down, quantity down. You have an increasing demand shift down here in the bottom left. So price up, quantity up. Over on the right, we had the things we talked about that would cause those things to shift. And then in the middle here, we have an increase in supply where supply goes up and in. I guess it's a decreasing supply, the supply curve up and in. And we see prices rising and quantity falling, or an increase in supply down here where we see price falling and quantity increasing. So this may be a good slide for you to think about what these things are and how those shifts occur and what's happening for your notes. When we went over this in class, and I had this slide here where we had a decrease in supply, so that supply shifted up to this new, and I asked what might have happened in this economy, and we got down here to where the price of a complement rises. That was me thinking too fast and thinking of what a complement would be. And right, if I'm looking down here, this decreasing supply, the price of an input rises. So these would be complementary inputs. Complements are things that you use together. So it could be things like, well, we did peanut butter and jelly on a demand side. If you're thinking of supply side, there are things that could be used together. So it could be things like bearings and grease. You have more bearings, you need more grease. Bearing price goes up, you're going to need less grease. And so what this really should be here is, I should probably have shifted that over there. And so thanks to the guys who pointed that out. That was an incorrect one. But again, complements, things that you use together. Substitutes, things that you displace each other. So substitutes displace each other. Complements are used together. Now, what about looking at multiple demand shifts? So here we have two examples where we have a decrease in supply and an increase in demand. And in the top example, right, we have a big increase in price, a small decrease in quantity. And down here, where we just shifted those around a little differently, we have an increase in price again, but we have an increase in quantity that goes along with it. That's why we do this ceteris paribus thing. We look at one thing when we're doing it. Okay, so back to this auction concept of how do we get to equilibrium. We talked about Paul Samuelson, or at least we threw his picture up there, Mr. Samuelson. And so rather than an auction, that what consumers and producers are doing that gets us to equilibrium is they're maximizing their profits. So these two areas here, they're trying to make them as big as possible. They're competing against each other. And it's a little like producing those surpluses and shortages, right? But that's how we get to the market equilibrium. And so when we do general equilibrium models or partial equilibrium models that are basically computer representations of these lines or crosses, we maximize L plus M, and we don't have to worry about intersecting all of these curves. There's some other things we think about, but right, that's how we get there. So consumers and producers are both trying to maximize their profit, and that gets us to this efficient market solution, given those perfect information, perfect competition things we talked about before. So this is the point in class where I said, look, I'm going to have this PowerPoint out here. You're going to have the PowerPoint. You can test yourself on it. You guys can do that here too as well. I'm going to walk through these as we go. You can download this PowerPoint that's on, you must have found it because you got to this video. And if you click down there and do a slideshow, you can get through this as well. I'll tell you what point you can go in to maybe get it, go to minute, whatever. And you can get there and click the slideshow and you can do it on your own. When we get to the part where we have the NPV question, I'm going to grade it on 5 points, and there's needs to be a timeline. You get a point for having a timeline. I say that every year, and every year people don't put timelines down. How can I give you partial credit if you don't put a timeline down? Then you need to identify what equations you're going to be using. The equation that's in there could be a multi-part question. That's what we had in our example, right? You got to have the equations for those things that fit in there. Write down what the known values are. A equals what? N equals what? What's the interest rate, right? What's T? And then put them in the equations. Let me see it and then get to that correct answer. Following these things helps you walk through the problem. It also helps me give you partial credit when I'm grading it. So give me a way to give you the best score possible by following these steps. All right, onward and upward. A model that combines biological and economic processes is called a partial equilibrium model. No, it is a bioeconomic model. So thinking back, right, just what these terms are we were going over just today, right? That's what we're looking at there. Markets are efficient if quantity of supply equals quantity demanded. So if you're thinking about that cross, that's kind of what I'm getting at here. And that's true, right? This one's getting at that where price or supply or marginal cost equals quantity demanded, or where the supply and demand curve meet. That's that efficient point. Compounding takes a single value back in time. So no, compounding takes a present value and moves it forward in time, right? Okay, so think about what we did way back when, just looking at basic compounding and discounting. Macroeconomic models tend to look at individual human or industrial choices. So this is just another definitional one. We went over this earlier in the slideshow or in this video. Macroeconomics are broad models that look across all industries and regions. So macroeconomic, macro, big, micro, small. Sorry about that. Right, that's what you want to be thinking about when you're looking at these. Question 5 here. The economic term for looking at two changes to a market is called ceteris paribus. No, ceteris paribus means all else equal, or look at one change in a market. Okay, number 6, in economics, static efficiency requires discounting. Right, false. Whoop, you go back, I didn't have a description on there. Right, no, because it's in one time period. You can compare things in one time period without having to use a discounting. Discounting is how we look at things in multiple time periods, conceptually in the same time period. The net present value tells you the most you'd be willing to pay for something, right? And that was true when we were looking at land values and we figured out what those land values are. We talked about how that is the most you'd be willing to pay for it, but you'd certainly be willing to pay less for it. So, right, it's the most you'd be willing to pay for it. If there is inflation, then the future real price would be lower than the future marginal price. So in this one, you may want to think about what the graphs look like, right? And think back to that graphic that we had with diesel prices. And way out there in the future, because of inflation, because you're inflating those real prices, you're down lower than you would have been with the nominal prices. So, true. Which concept is the most important in environmental economics? So, equity, temporal dynamics, efficiency, none of the above. Right? The answer here would be none of the above. There is no one most important concept. Right? These are all important concepts that are fundamental to understanding economic decision making. Which is more often related to extractive resources? Flood control, goods, habitat, or services? So which is more important here, or what most often related is goods. So we talked about how they were extractive, which they tend to be quantitative. And those services like the flood control and habitat tend to be qualitative. Like if the law of demand holds, then an increase in the price of a good or service will lead to a increase in quantity demanded, a decrease in the quantity demanded, both of the above, or none of the above. And so here it's a decrease in the quantity commanded. Right, so as you're going, in this case, in the increase in price, you're going up, that means you're going to be going down. So you have that downward sloping demand curve, or our law of diminishing pay, which is not a condition for market efficiency. So no public goods, perfect information, the firm sets the price, no externalities, And here it's the firm sets a price. So I didn't have quite this many on the graphic there today. So you probably won't see that one there. I shrunk that down a little bit as we go. Discounting deals primarily with which economic concept? So discounting, is it equity, efficiency, temporal dynamics, or none of the above? The answer here is temporal dynamics. So when we're looking at things across time, we need discounting to be able to look at them within a consistent framework at one point in time. Discounting allows us to do that. Okay, which of the following is how you'd find the total willingness to pay for good or service? So A, divide by the consumer price index. B, vertically sum each willingness to pay. C, horizontally sum each willingness to pay. Or D, Google it. Here, whoops, I had my slide pop up there before, but you would sum horizontally. We look at everyone's willingness to pay, and then you sum across them horizontally to get the total. That's what we're showing down here in the bottom right to get that. 16, which term is typically not associated with natural resource economics? So A, productive efficiency, B, dynamic efficiency, C, GDP efficiency, or D, allocative efficiency. So here, the answer would be C, GDP efficiency. GDP is just a measure of economic output. And these other ones were all things we talked about in our earlier slides, right? So there we go. When can I add two values together? So A, when the units are the same. B, when they exist in the same time period. C, both A and B, or D, neither A nor B. So here, A and B, got to have the same units. You can't add, say, elk with dollars or elk with beavers, right? And they have to be in the same time period. Elk 100 years from now is not the same as elk right now. Dollars 100 years from now is not the same as dollars right now. Okay, so we get into our graphing. And so you guys are gonna have to look at something like this and pick out the points that make sense. So what am I asking for? Producer's profit. Marginal cost 1, that's solid line. Marginal benefit 1. What is the producer's profit here? And here it's LPCA, or that triangle below the price line, but above the cost, marginal cost. Right, so M on this one here, and LPCA gives you that area for marginal cost 1, marginal benefit 1. What's the total cost for marginal cost 2 and marginal benefit 1? So now we're up on this dashed line, and what is the total cost? And so here it's APKJ, or the area under that marginal cost curve up to the equilibrium quantity. Okay, and so that here is N. Here it's a triangle with a rectangle below it, so they don't have to be perfect triangles in these cases, but the area under the marginal cost curve. Okay, question, would consumers be better off moving from marginal cost 1 to marginal cost 2? So what we're looking at here is no. The marginal cost 1, the consumer's profit or consumer surplus was EBMKV, whereas when it moved up, shifted up to marginal cost 2, the consumer's profit or surplus is now EB, which is smaller than the others. So it has shrunk and consumers are not better off. All right, guys. Hopefully that helps you out. As I said, you can, well, I guess you've already seen all that, so I can't say any of that before, but good luck, and I'll see you on Wednesday.